Hey, what's up everybody? 8-Bit Flashback here. Today I want to share with you some old school methods for playing PlayStation backups and imports on the original PlayStation and PlayStation 2. Plus I will also share with you my very first physical console mod that I did way back in the early 2000s, which involved modding my fat PS2 to load import and backup games from the top of the console by using a highly customized lid that opens. So there's multiple different methods out there for playing imports and backups on the PlayStation. Like the GameShark, this is a cheat boot disc that comes with its own custom memory card, and this can also be used to boot import and backup CDs. But my favorite method for playing imports and backups is using this, the Pro Action Replay, which is also a cheat management device, but instead of being CD based, this plugs into the parallel port that's located on the back of the PlayStation, and this version I have is actually the Japanese version. And I prefer this over the US model because it seems to have better compatibility for loading imports and backups. For whatever reason, most of the games seem to load just fine with the US model, but with certain games I could not get them to load properly and just get a black screen. But when using the Japanese version of the Pro Action Replay, these games seem to load just fine. So I have the best luck when using the Japanese version. But keep in mind that's based on only the games I've tested, which is probably less than 100. And there is literally thousands of PlayStation games to choose from, so the compatibility may vary. So now that I have my Pro Action Replay plugged in, I'm just about ready to test some backups and imports. But before I can do that, I have to do one more step, and that's disabling the lid sensor that's located right here. And this is super simple to do. All I use is tape, and what I'm going to use here is foil tape, and this has really a nice adhesion, so I prefer using this tape, but duct tape would probably work as well. So I'm just tearing off a little tiny piece. This is maybe 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and press it on this lid sensor and then depress the button and then stick that tape to the sides of the walls while that button's depressed to keep that button in the press down position. Now you could also take that case apart and take that button down as well, but for me this is by far the easiest way. And by taping down that lid sensor button, this is going to trick the PlayStation to think that that lid is closed even when it's in the open position. Now let's go ahead and test an import game out. And what we want to do first is just go ahead and load an official non-import game. So it doesn't matter what game it is, you can use whatever game you want. And what we're trying to do here is just load an official game to make the PlayStation think that we have an official game loaded, which we do, but then we're going to swap this out and put in our backup or import game in, and I'm going to show you how that works here in just a few. So I'm going to power this up now and let it get to the main menu, and most of this is going to be in Japanese, so I won't be able to read it, but I know how to navigate through it. So at this point, we've already bypassed the security of the PlayStation, and now what we need to do is get that disc to stop spinning. With some versions of the Action Replay, your disc may have already stopped spinning at the main menu, which is great, but if it's like mine, you'll have to force it to stop spinning. And we can do that by scrolling down to CD-ROM, then press circle. And once we're inside that CD-ROM menu, go ahead and push select, and that'll stop that disc from spinning. Now it's time to go ahead and swap that disc out. So now I'm going to grab an import game and go ahead and load that game. So we'll pull this one out, and I'll grab an import game. We'll use Crash Bandicoot, the Japanese version. And go ahead and put that inside the PlayStation. And I highly recommend to get that disc to stop spinning before you change it. There is methods out there for hot swapping. That means changing that disc while it's actually moving, but I think that's dangerous for the drive, and you can potentially damage your PlayStation. So you're a lot better off if you can figure out a way to get that disc to stop spinning. And now that I have that import disc loaded, I'm going to push the X button twice to get back to the main menu, and then scroll all the way to the top and push circle to load the game. And now the import game should load no problem. Now if you're using the US version of the Action Replay, the menu is going to have the same layout, just going to be in a different language. So the CD-ROM should be in the same location, and then loading the game should be on the top. But it's just going to be in all English, so it'll be much easier to read. And once you do get that game to load, you can go ahead and close that tray. I'm just leaving it open now for demonstration purposes. Now let's go ahead and try out a backup game. So here's a backup copy of Crash Bandicoot 2. And I did use Alcohol 120 to burn this CD, but I can also use Image Burn as well. Both of those programs seem to work really well with PlayStation format games. And this is a custom 3D printed stand for my original PlayStation, which I use for display purposes. But this also works great for PlayStation backups. The PlayStation gets super picky when using CDRs, and doesn't work well with most brands. For the best compatibility, it's recommended to use Super ASIO CDRs. But even when I use these types of CDs, I still run into issues with them not working, unless my PlayStation is in a vertical position like this. And this model is available on Thingiverse if anyone is interested in making one for themselves. Now for whatever reason, the PlayStation seems to read backup discs much better in a vertical position, and this seems to work well with most brands of CDRs, even non-ASIO, when it's in this position. And to play a backup game, it works the same way. I just gotta get inside that CD-ROM menu, push select, wait for that disc to stop spinning, then load my backup game. Once that's in the tray, I'm gonna push X twice on the remote to get back to the main menu. Then scroll all the way to the top and press circle to load the game. Now without a stand, it is kind of a pain in the butt to prop that PlayStation up vertically, but it can be done just by propping a washcloth underneath the side of it, or even using some books as props, but it is much less ghetto if you're using a stand like I have here. And it's not required to have that PlayStation sitting vertically for all games. There is some games that load just fine with the PlayStation in a flat position, but for myself, I have much better luck with that PlayStation sitting vertically like this. Now let's go ahead and test this game out, and I'll show you that it plays with no issues. So as you can see, it's playing just fine with the PlayStation in the vertical position. Now with this particular game, I did test the console in the flat position using just a cheap verbatim CDR, and it did not work at all. But when using a Super ASIO CDR, I was able to get the game to boot and work, but during the video cutscenes it would skip a lot. But this was easily resolved by turning my console back to the vertical position, and it worked just fine. So as I mentioned earlier, the PlayStation can be super picky when trying to load CDR backups. Now let's move on to my very first physical console mod, and that just so happened to be for the original Sony PlayStation 2. So anyone out there that's familiar with the original fat Sony PlayStation 2 are aware that it only loads discs from the front. And I decided to alter and mod my console to load discs from the top as well. And by doing this, I was able to play backups for the PlayStation 1 by tricking the console to think that that disc tray is in the closed position. Now I did this mod a long time ago, sometime in the early 2000s, and this was before the PS2 had been hacked with the FreeMakeBoot memory card hack. So to do this mod, it ended up being quite a bit of work. I started with cutting and trimming the case, then I added various hinges, screws, and bolts to make a functional lid that opens from the top as well as the side. And the end product is a little crude looking to say the least, but it is my very first console mod, and it does work. In the later years, after doing this mod, Sony ended up releasing the PS2 Slim, which has a door that actually opens very similar when compared to my modded PS2, so it makes for a cool comparison. And I wouldn't recommend to anyone out there to chop up their fat PS2 and mod it like mine because there is much easier mods and hacks available now. But back in the early 2000s, there wasn't much options to choose from. So back in the day to play my PlayStation 1 backups on my PS2, I used the GameShark, and this is version 3.4. And how this worked is it worked as a boot disk. It would boot up to the GameShark menu. Once I got to that main menu, that disk would stop spinning, then I could open this door, then swap it out for my PlayStation 1 disc, then boot the game. And this also required a special memory card that looked like this. But with this method, it only works for PlayStation 1 backups. Eventually, the PlayStation 2 became fully hacked with the use of swap discs like this. This is called the Swap Magic. And how this works is you put this into the drive. Once it gets to a certain point on the menu, you're able to switch that disc out. And this came with a key that you could actually unlock the drive and pull that out from the front, so the PlayStation 2 did not recognize when you're swapping discs. But with the mod I had, this made it much easier because I could just open that lid from the top instead of having to open this front tray with a key. With boot discs like this, you're able to boot loader discs to install hacks like FreeMakeBoot to memory cards, making boot discs no longer needed. Or you can even buy preloaded FreeMakeBoot memory cards that you just plug into your PS2 and it becomes hacked just that easy. And for this video, I'm mainly concentrating on old school methods for playing PlayStation 1 imports and backups, but later on in another video, I'll talk more about PlayStation 2 backup methods. So now I'm going to demonstrate how I used to play PlayStation 1 backups back in the day. So I got my GameShark memory card in place with my GameShark boot disk in the drive, and I'm using GameShark version 3.4. So now I'm going to power this up and wait patiently for that menu to boot up. And what should happen is it should recognize this as an original PlayStation 1 disc. And there we go. So now it's bypassed all the security checks and it thinks this is an original PlayStation game. What's funny about this version of GameShark version 3.4 is it does not work for loading backups and imports on the original PlayStation, but on the PlayStation 2, it works just fine. So to play my PlayStation 1 backups or imports, I select Start Game, then Start Game without codes, then I'll get this message here. Open PlayStation CD lid, remove GameShark CD, then insert game CD. And if I was just to push the eject button, this would not work because what happens is when you eject that disc and you put it back in, it's going to have to do the security checks again. So what I have to do is open it from the top and then swap out my disc. And we'll go ahead and test out an import game first. This is Crash Bandicoot 2, the Japanese version. So now I'll push X as soon as that disc is in the drive, and that should load the game just fine. And there it is. So this is how I used to play imports on my PS2 back in the day, and there is newer methods out there that are much easier now, but this is what I did way back then. Now we'll go ahead and test out a backup game, and we'll do the same thing. We're going to boot that system up with the GameShark CD in place. Once it gets to this point here, we'll swap out the disc. And now we're going to test out Spider-Man. Now I'll go ahead and close that lid up and press X to start the game. And it works. There we go. So there's my PlayStation 1 backup working on my PS2. Now with the PlayStation 2, it doesn't seem to be near as picky with CDRs. Whether I'm playing it flat or vertically, it seems to read the disc the same. Now we'll go ahead and test out the game here for just a few so I can show you that the game is working just fine. And just to let you know, I'm using the Hyperkin HD cable that I recently reviewed, and it seems to be working great with my PS2 so far. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked this video, if you could, hit that like button. And I would like to do a series in the future featuring multiple different systems showing the old school hacks for Sega Saturn, Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, Xbox, etc. Have yourself a great day, and I'll see you next time.